When power is abused, justice must fight back. But what happens when the man seeking justice is also the one with the most to lose? Downtown Chicago pulsed with energy, the towering buildings casting long shadows over the busy streets. The city, a battleground between justice and corruption, carried stories in every alleyway, on every sidewalk. Amid the chaos, Jack Carter walked home, his pace steady but measured. At 72, Jack moved slower than he once had, but his posture remained upright, his dignity intact. A decorated Vietnam veteran, he bore the weight of his past with quiet strength. In one hand, he clutched a brown paper bag filled with groceries. In the other, his cane. A necessity now, though he refused to let it define him. As he reached an intersection, the blare of a police siren split the air. A patrol car pulled up sharply, and Officer Roy McDougal stepped out. His uniform, crisp and imposing, carried an authority that often went unchecked. "Move it along, old man," McDougal sneered, his voice sharp and commanding. Jack paused, gripping his cane tighter. "I'm moving as fast as I can, officer." That was when it happened. The shove came suddenly, unexpected. McDougal's hand struck Jack's shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. His cane slipped from his grasp. The impact was swift. His body hit the pavement hard, the grocery bag crumpling beside him, its contents rolling into the street. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Bystanders gasped. A woman clapped a hand over her mouth. A man reached for his phone, capturing the moment as it unfolded. Jack lay still, the shock of the fall momentarily overriding the pain that flared through his back and knees. His breath came in sharp gasps, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had faced worse in war. He had endured more than this. McDougal scoffed, looking down at him. "You should have moved faster." A murmur of discontent rippled through the growing crowd. A young man stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "That wasn't necessary," he muttered, his voice edged with anger. McDougal shot him a warning glare. "Keep moving, unless you want a problem too." Jack closed his eyes briefly, inhaling through his nose. He could feel the rough pavement against his palms, the bruises already forming. But more than the physical pain, it was the indignity of it all, the abuse of power, the unchecked arrogance. A woman knelt beside him. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need an ambulance?" Jack exhaled slowly before answering. "Number I just need a moment." The moment happened so fast that the bystanders barely had time to react. 1 second, Jack Carter was gathering himself, steadying his breath. The next, Officer Roy McDougal had seized him by the collar, yanking him upright with a force that sent a fresh wave of pain through his aging body. Before Jack could utter a word, McDougal slammed him against the hood of the patrol car. A metallic clang rang through the air as Jack's chest collided with the vehicle. The force rattled his bones, knocking the wind out of him. His hands braced against the burning, hot surface of the car, his mind reeling from the sudden escalation. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. A few people hesitated, caught between fear and outrage. They had seen abuse of power before, but never this blatant, never this cruel. "Hey, what are you doing?" someone shouted. "He's an old man." McDougal ignored the voice. His grip tightened as he leaned in, his breath hot against Jack's ear. "Shut your mouth and die, you black—" The vile words barely left his lips before he delivered a brutal strike to Jack's ribs. Jack groaned as pain radiated through his side. His knees buckled slightly, his body sagging under the force of the blow. But McDougal was not done. He shoved Jack downward, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. His cane lay yards away, useless in this moment of cruelty. The impact sent shock waves of pain through his already aching body. He felt the rough ground scrape against his skin, tearing into him as he landed hard. Phones were out now. A young woman at the front of the crowd recorded everything, her hands shaking as she captured the injustice unfolding before her eyes. She had seen stories like this on the news before, but never thought she would witness one firsthand. Her heart pounded as she kept the camera steady, knowing that every second mattered. Jack tried to speak. He needed to say something, to demand dignity, to remind them all that he was a man, not just another victim to be discarded. His lips parted, but before he could form the words, McDougal raised his baton and brought it down with ruthless precision. The crack echoed. Jack's head struck the pavement, the impact sending a sharp burst of light through his vision before darkness began to creep in. His body stilled. Blood pooled beneath him, mixing with the dust and grime of the city streets. His breath, once labored, grew shallow. His eyes fluttered, his consciousness slipping away. The onlookers stood frozen, horror etched across their faces. A man in the crowd clenched his fists. "He's killing him! Someone do something!" A mother covered her child's eyes, shielding them from the nightmare unfolding before them. Another man reached for his phone, dialing 911 despite the irony of calling for help when the danger wore a badge. Then, sirens. Another squad car screeched to a halt nearby. Officers rushed out, their eyes darting between the unconscious man on the pavement and McDougal, who stood over him, his expression unreadable. The weight of what had just happened was thick in the air, suffocating, undeniable. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The video was already being shared, spreading like wildfire. The city was about to explode. Roy McDougal smirked as he watched the ambulance pull away, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off his polished badge. The crowd still lingered, their murmurs thick with disbelief and outrage, but McDougal remained unfazed. He had done this before, and nothing had ever come of it. Jack Carter was just another old man who had gotten in his way. That was all McDougal saw. Another name that would fade into a case file. Another moment that would be forgotten by tomorrow. He rolled his shoulders, glancing at his fellow officers who exchanged wary glances but said nothing. They had seen what happened. They knew. But silence had always been their unspoken oath. The city never held them accountable. Why would this time be any different? What McDougal didn't know was who Jack Carter really was. That night, as the city's skyline glowed under the weight of unrest, the video of the assault spread like wildfire. Social media erupted. News anchors interrupted scheduled programming to air the disturbing footage. The grainy video, shaky and raw, captured every moment. The shove, the strike, the baton cracking against an aging skull. It was undeniable. It was damning. And millions saw it. One of those people was Attorney General Michael Carter. Sitting in his dimly lit office, Michael's fingers curled around his phone, his breath slow and measured. The screen illuminated his face, highlighting the sharp contours of his features, the same features that mirrored the unconscious man in the hospital bed, his father. His pulse roared in his ears as the video played again, and again, and again. Every second of it burned into his mind, fueling the fire in his chest. The sound of the baton striking bone, the way his father crumpled onto the pavement like he was nothing, the officer's smirk, the laughter, the callous disregard for a life that had meant everything to him. The world saw Jack Carter as an elderly man assaulted by law enforcement. But Michael saw something more. He saw the man who had raised him, the man who had instilled discipline, honor, and integrity into him. He saw the father who had survived war, only to be brutalized on the streets he had fought to protect. The weight of it all pressed down on him. He clenched his jaw, his entire body rigid with barely restrained rage. He had spent his career upholding the law, believing in its purpose, trusting that justice was more than just a word. But tonight, that belief felt hollow. A cold fury settled deep in his chest. He stared at his phone, at the frozen image of McDougal's sneering face. The officer had no idea what he had done. He had no idea who he had put in that ambulance. He had no idea what was coming. Michael exhaled slowly, controlling his breath, but his grip on the phone tightened. "That officer just put my father in a coma," Michael whispered, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He picked the wrong man. Outside his office window, the city buzzed with life, unaware of what was coming. But soon, the entire system would feel the weight of Michael Carter's wrath. He had spent years defending the law, but this time, he was coming for justice himself. Michael Carter didn't waste time. By sunrise, he was already at his desk, his team assembled before him. The video had gone viral overnight, igniting outrage across the nation. His father's assault was no longer just a brutal incident. It was a rallying cry for justice, and Michael was going to make sure it led to something real. "I want a full investigation into the Chicago Police Department," he ordered, his voice cold and controlled. "Start with McDougal. I want everything on him, his service record, his complaints, every incident he's been involved in." His team moved quickly. Within hours, files were being pulled, reports reviewed, and it didn't take long for the pattern to emerge. McDougal, believing himself untouchable, had already filed his report. It was the same script officers like him had used for years. The suspect was aggressive. "I feared for my life." Michael read the words in disgust. His father was a 72-year-old veteran who had been walking home with groceries. But McDougal had spun a different reality, one that justified violence, one that excused the unthinkable. But this time, the video told a different story, and Michael had more than just one video. He had years of complaints against McDougal, a pattern of excessive force, a history of racial profiling, witnesses who had been ignored, victims who had never received justice. Each page in the file was another failure, another life affected, another moment when the system had looked the other way. Michael's jaw tightened as he flipped through the reports. It was worse than he had imagined. McDougal wasn't just a rogue cop. He was part of a system that protected officers like him. And as Michael's team dug deeper, they uncovered something even bigger. Chief Green, the head of the department, had been covering up misconduct for years. Reports had been buried. Investigations quietly closed. Complaints against officers like McDougal had been dismissed before they ever reached the public. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had realized. The files painted a picture of a police force more concerned with protecting its own than serving the community. Michael exhaled slowly, his fury controlled but burning. The weight of it all pressed down on him. This was no longer just about McDougal or even Chief Green. This was about an entire system that had thrived in darkness, unchecked and unchallenged. His fingers tapped against the desk as he considered his next move. He knew what was at stake. Going after the police department meant going after an institution that had shielded itself for decades. It meant challenging a force that saw itself as above the law. But he had no choice. He had sworn an oath to justice, and now that justice demanded action. Michael's gaze hardened as he turned to his team. We build the case piece by piece. We expose everything. No more silence. No more cover-ups. A quiet determination filled the room. His investigators nodded, their movements purposeful, their resolve matching his own. They had the evidence. Now, they needed to act. Michael turned back to the files, his grip tightening around the pages. He knew this fight would not be easy. He knew the resistance would be strong, but none of that mattered. "This goes beyond one officer," he murmured. "We're taking down the whole system." The fight for justice had begun, and this time the system would not win. Protests erupted across Chicago, the streets filled with voices demanding justice for Jack Carter. Signs waved high, chants echoed through the towering buildings, and the weight of outrage pressed against city officials. The people would not be silenced. They had seen the video, they knew the truth, and they would not let it be buried. Michael Carter stood at the center of the storm. The pressure came from all sides, protesters demanding action, politicians urging caution, and powerful figures within the system pushing back. Some wanted him to step down, to let the system do what it had always done, protect its own. Others wanted McDougal to walk free, warning Michael that pursuing this case would have consequences. "You're playing with fire, Carter," a high-ranking officer warned him in a private meeting. "You need to tread carefully." Michael didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto the officers, steady and unwavering. Then let it burn. His team worked relentlessly, gathering every shred of evidence. The video was just the beginning. Witness testimonies, past complaints, buried reports, all of it painted a damning picture of McDougal's history. The officer had operated with impunity for years, protected by a system that thrived in darkness. But the light was shining now, and there was no turning back. Days of investigation led to a breakthrough. McDougal's report, riddled with lies, crumbled under scrutiny. His claims of self-defense collapsed under the weight of the footage, the eyewitnesses, and his own record of misconduct. The truth was undeniable. The walls were closing in. Then, Michael uncovered something even bigger. Chief Green, the head of the police department, had been covering up officer misconduct for years. Reports had been manipulated, evidence had been discarded, and complaints had been dismissed before they could ever reach the public. It was a network of corruption, one that stretched far beyond a single officer. With the weight of undeniable proof behind him, Michael made his move. The case was airtight, the evidence overwhelming. And so, on live television, the announcement was made. After a thorough investigation, we are officially indicting Officer Roy McDougal for the assault of Jack Carter, Michael declared. Gasps rippled through the crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Reporters scrambled to capture every word, every reaction. The city held its breath. Justice was in motion, but the battle was far from over. The courtroom was packed as the trial of Roy McDougal began. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the back of the room, and the world watched as justice was put to the test. For many, this case was about more than just one officer's actions. It was about a system that had protected men like him for too long. The prosecution wasted no time. They presented a detailed account of McDougal's history, years of unchecked brutality, a long list of victims who had never seen justice. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as case after case was revealed, each one painting the picture of a man who had abused his badge without fear of consequences. At the center of it all was Jack Carter. Still in a coma, he had become a symbol of police corruption. His image was on protest signs, his story was in every headline, and his name was chanted in the streets. He could not speak for himself, but the evidence spoke louder than any words could. McDougal sat motionless as his past unraveled before him. The footage of his attack on Jack played on the courtroom screen, the brutal reality impossible to deny. The jury watched, their expressions unreadable, but the weight of the truth was undeniable. Then, after weeks of testimony, the ruling came. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of relief. Some wept, others cheered. For the first time, an officer who had used his power to harm had been held accountable. McDougal was sentenced to 25 years in prison. It was a historic moment, a declaration that the shield of law enforcement would no longer be a free pass for brutality. But the fallout did not stop there. Chief Green, the man who had protected McDougal and covered up years of misconduct, resigned in disgrace. His legacy, once built on authority and control, crumbled under the weight of his own corruption. Outside the courthouse, Michael Carter faced a sea of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust toward him, but he remained composed. "Today, we sent a message," he said, his voice firm. "Justice is coming for all of them." The battle was not over, but this was a victory. And the world was watching what came next. Weeks had passed since the trial, but the weight of the battle still lingered in the air. Chicago remained tense, its streets filled with conversations of justice, corruption, and the long road ahead. The protests had quieted, but the demand for change had not faded. The world had watched as a guilty verdict was handed down, but those who had fought for justice knew that this was just the beginning. In a quiet hospital room, Jack Carter finally stirred. His fingers twitched, his eyelids fluttered, and then, slowly, his eyes opened. The beeping of the monitors filled the silence, a steady rhythm marking his return to consciousness. His body was weak, battered from both the attack and the weeks of stillness that followed. But he was awake. He had made it. Michael Carter sat beside him, his hand wrapped around his father's. He had barely left the hospital since the sentencing, waiting, hoping. Now, as Jack's tired eyes met his, a wave of relief washed over him. "We did it, Dad," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We got him." Jack took a slow breath, his lips curling into the faintest of smiles. His voice was raspy, weak, but filled with conviction. "Then keep fighting." Michael nodded, gripping his father's hand tighter. He had spent his career upholding the law, believing in the system. But now he knew justice was not a moment. It was a fight, one that never truly ended. McDougal was behind bars, but there were others like him. There were still victims without justice, still families waiting for answers. Jack had survived, but how many others had not? The battle wasn't over. The work wasn't done. Michael exhaled, steadying himself. His mission was clear. Justice didn't stop here. As Jack drifted back into sleep, Michael sat back in his chair, eyes fixed on the city beyond the hospital window. There was still a long road ahead, and he was ready to walk it.